It's really a privilege to have you here. But as we have you here in South Africa, it does sort of spring to my mind that I must ask you, why are you in South Africa and probably not in Botswana?
If you're prepared to have this interview go on for the rest of the year, it's a long and a big issue. But in short, it was at the invitation of former president of Nigeria, General Obasanjo. He was coming to attend an exhibition, I think that's what it was, in this country. And he had heard about what was going on in Botswana. And he wished to have a conversation, a discussion with me to see if there was anything he could do to try to intervene to resolve the issue. We have discovered that ever since Masisi took over the leadership of Botswana, he has totally eroded and undermined the many years of democracy and good governance that his predecessors have tried to put in place for the country.
Let's pause a moment and look at Botswana's governance over the past 10 years. Using GGA's governance coefficient for Africa shows government effectiveness. This graph measures the perception of the quality of public services, civil service, of policy formulation and implementation, and credibility of government commitments to such policies. This shows government effectiveness has dropped to a 10-year low, 0.257 in 2020 under President Masisi.
Botswana's success was brought about by the entire population. And it also came from some of our traditions as a people. It was in our culture. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, and being able to be tolerant of other people's views. It was something for which we were well known, not only in the continent, but worldwide. So I took a stand against him. The party that I joined, that I led, that my father formed, I left because it no longer represented the ideals that it was set up for. And then started a campaign by him against me, including life-threatening campaigns.
What are those plans, Mr. President? Because really we want to get to the bottom of this.
I can tell you that there have been 3 attempts to poison me, because the next elections are in 2024, 2 years down the road. Right. And he sees me as the biggest obstacle to his re-election. In fact, recently in the country, in the last couple of months, we've had about 13 by-elections at ward level, and they have lost 10. In areas which were, some of them were their strongholds, because people have turned against him and his party. He has become deeply unpopular. So they started manufacturing stories about I had stolen 100 billion pula. In dollars, $10 billion. Right. It was money which the country never ever had in the first place.
Yes.
It was thrown out of the High Court. And this came on the eve of the last elections, 2019, in trying to get people to turn against me and the party I had now associated myself with. Yes. So the latest thing after that failed in the courts, they then came up with weapons of war, that now I've been stealing weapons of war over the years. So apparently when I was president, I'd be able to sneak out of State House, a guarded area, go into a military camp guarded, go to the armories which are guarded, go and help myself to weapons and go and hide them somewhere.
We know you're a very a capable military man, but that is a bit of a stretch. But your critics would claim that all of this on your part is just sour grapes. And in essence, one of the reasons why you've been put upon or maybe pursued by President Masisi is really because they are serious accusations that you must account for.
I recently approached a parliamentary committee in Botswana, and I said, bring the independent entity to establish whether 100 billion was stolen, whether I've stolen weapons of war, to also come in and investigate my allegations of them trying to poison me on 3 occasions. And lastly, the rigging of the 2019 elections. Now, you would think that if they felt that they were in the clear about this, they would jump at the opportunity and say, okay, let's go and do that. To this date, they haven't done that.
So, Mr. President, some others who observe Botswana politics quite acutely say that you had actually handpicked President Masisi as your successor in an attempt really to be the power behind this throne and to influence him. And this challenge that you are facing right now emanates from the fact that he has developed his own independent policies and approaches which are different from yours. And that is the issue.
Well, if he had independent policies, that would be welcome, but he doesn't have any. We had a caucus of parliament, of the BDP then, where I put it to them to say that, well, the next vice president, that was at the 2014 elections, who comes in is going to be the next president of Botswana. So I'm doing something a bit different. I'm going to consult you as to who do you think should become the next president. I got about 6 names. He was 4th. Now, why did I reject the top 3? One of them was my brother, so for obvious reasons that wouldn't have been appropriate. The other 2 came from my home village. Now, when I became vice president, the president then came from my home village. When I became president, my first vice president was from my home village. The second one came from my area, not the home village. And I just thought, you know, if you perpetuate this thing, you know, president, vice president coming from the same village and area in Botswana, it's not inclusive. Eventually, we don't have that problem of tribalism as such, but eventually people will start saying, but why just from one area of the country do the president, vice president come from? So the other 2 came. So if I had wanted to do what you say, to be able to contain and maintain control, I would have selected those who came from my village, you know, because I'm their chief, to try to influence them, but I didn't.
So Mr. President, you raised this issue of sub-ethnicity. You are Khosikgolo, paramount a chief of the Bangwatu people, and certainly in a strategic location of Seruwe, which is the village or your home area that you refer to. Given this, recently we heard that the local government minister, Mr. Mokgweetsi had his vehicle and his home torched. And this was also sort of put down to the rivalry that exists between yourself and President Masisi. It's really a concerning phenomenon, especially for Botswana, which has been known to be relatively peaceful.
Whoever did it could have been linked to what you have just said.
Right.
Because he wrote a letter to the tribal authority saying to him that they must no longer hold traditional Kota meetings where I am the subject of discussion. And that flies in the face of democracy and our culture. Because a Kota, as it is called, is where the people from the community come together. And there's an expression which says, which means that anything you say, literally, should be welcomed, which is a way of saying freedom of speech. So even if you don't like what someone is saying, it must be received as being your opinion, which you're entitled to. So when you say to people, you cannot talk in a traditional setup about your traditional leader, what does that mean? And in a democracy in Botswana, you can't tell people what they can or cannot talk about.
But Mr. President, this approach to politics and your interaction with President Masisi, is increasingly taking a rather nasty turn. We saw your twin brothers, Tsekedi and Anthony Khama, being detained by the DIS, apparently, which is the Intelligence Services of Botswana, with the police. Is this going to stop?
This is unfortunately what happens in dictatorships, where people feel threatened by anybody. Even the lead up to the 2019 elections, the leader of the opposition then was harassed like we've never seen before in the country. Forensics for Justice, I don't know that. A gentleman I think called O'Sullivan. They had a press conference where they exposed the rigging that took place in 2019. So no, it's not going to stop. And you know, one of my brothers, you know, he was in town. He'd been going to his office over several days, and then he's surrounded by a number of vehicles. Guys jump out of the vehicles holding assault rifles and pistols pointed at him. Someone who is unarmed, innocent, drag them off into detention. The wife, she was also visiting a friend at her house. 7 or so of them come in. They grab her, twist her arm behind her back, throw her down to the ground. She had had a few weeks before that an operation on her neck here. And after she was released, she actually had to go on to painkillers because of the physical harm they did to her. They racially insulted her because she's an American. And they put her in a cell deliberately, which was still, you could still see remains of human waste on the floor of the cell. And they took away her shoes so that she'd have to walk barefooted on that cell in that condition. No mattress to sleep on, no blanket to sleep on. And you know, there are bars to the cell, and the neighboring cell had a man in it who had a 2-liter water bottle, who kept splashing her with water, and the people there did nothing about it. And this went on for 2 days. Even my other brother, same thing, put in a police cell on the floor, no blankets, no mattresses. And at the end of it all, no charges. So the whole thing was designed as a witch hunt, because they were frustrated, they couldn't get at me, so get at the family.
So at the funeral of former President of Zambia, Rupia Banda, you said, and I quote, that you're being persecuted by politicians who are quite nasty. Is this what you were referring to?
I was referring to President Banda having been a very, very nice, gentle person. And I said, I always thought he was too nice to be a politician. Not that all politicians are not nice. And I said, some are nice, but some are definitely not. And of course I was referring to the likes of people like Masisi. And I also went on to talk about how when he left office, there was an attempt to persecute him. And I made reference to the fact that, you know, I am going through the same thing.